In fact, our show's called Gracearchy, so I'm going to say that whichever side you think is more to blame, the Christian grace position, and I know Nick professes faith, the Christian grace perspective would be to try to understand the person you disagree with, the enemy in this particular case. Whichever one is more in the wrong, you have a greater duty to attempt to understand where they're coming from.
Instead of conflict and aggression, here's governance built on grace. Welcome to Gracearchy with Jim Babka. Glad to see everybody again this morning. We're coming to you only a few days after the fatal shooting of Renee Good by an ICE agent in Minneapolis. And today, Jim would like to respond to a video made by Nick Freitas, who is a commentator, YouTube influencer, and I believe a congressman.
Oh, you're close.
I'm close. Okay.
Okay. He is he has been several times how they don't have a house. They have something like a
a state assembly member.
Yeah, state assembly.
Okay.
I think they call it the House of Burgesses or something over there.
But yeah. That's right.
Yes.
It's all coming back to me.
Commonwealth. It's the Commonwealth of Virginia.
The Commonwealth of Virginia.
Yes.
Okay. So Commonwealth of Virginia Assembly Member Nick Freitas. And by the way, I should set this up because the title of his episode is "The Left's War on ICE Just Took a Violent Turn." And reading the subtitle on that question I have for you, Jim, and I know you want to introduce Nick and all of that, but I wonder, is this clickbait or does Nick actually want Minneapolis to burn?
Yeah, the thumbnail says is Minneapolis about to burn or something to that effect. And so right in the title that you just shared there's a collective judgment.
Yes.
A abstract collective group is blamed for the actions of what is conceivably one individual. It's all, they all have the same motive. They're like a blob. And this is faulty analysis. This is not anywhere to start.
Well, as libertarians, I mean, we always get swept under whatever the current duopoly view is that we're opposing.
Yeah, there's this, and by the way, it is a natural human instinct to want to try to collectivize these things and simplify them as much as possible.
Make sense.
Right? So it's not abnormal to do this, but it's very much a part of the persona that he has on his program, which I've begun watching since the Charlie Kirk assassination. He issued a tweet that went very hyper viral. It was seen by probably more than 10 million people by now. It's been shared all over the place. And it was the script basically for one of his podcasts. And then he proceeded to do a whole series of podcasts. I've met Nick. I don't know whether he would remember me or not. We were in a meeting together, and we have mutual acquaintances. In fact, one in particular that's really important. And so I am somewhat familiar with his work. I've seen a lot of his shorts over the years, particularly on Facebook, and I consider him to be very much libertarian adjacent. I am not going to do him the disfavor of saying he's a libertarian because he actually, just in recent days, told off a group of libertarians about how we process things. But he does definitely project an image that he is for small government. And ICE is exactly the opposite of small government, just categorically so.
Categorically. And by the way, I should probably position us properly here as voluntarists, because often libertarian is such a big tent that nobody really knows what that means. But just to reinforce that perspective, can you offer what a voluntarist is for our listeners?
So a libertarian is somebody who believes that the central issue or question in any situation is who is initiating force. That persuasion is preferable to force. We should not be using force. So it has to do with discussions of violence and what is acceptable social violence, what is and what is not. And we're very obsessed with that. Then a voluntarist is someone who believes that all of your relationships should be freely chosen, that you should not be coerced into any particular relationship. You should also be able to exit the relationships you have. Now, exit can be painful because there may be assets that have to, for example, be settled, or some other, relational cohesion things that will not be pleasant to go through. But when you glue something together and then tear it apart, you expect some kind of damage there. But there's always a way out, and you can always exit. You can always divorce a relational given relationship situation. So
thank you for that.
yeah. So, and I come from the voluntarist perspective, but the analysis we will be applying for the most part today will be libertarian, which is
Yeah,
really what libertarianism is. It is an analytical tool that says, where is the violence located here? Who initiated or used? And I think this is an important point. I just want to say up front, I feel like people who have used like the non-aggression principle, NAP, that's called the NAP for short, or what we prefer to call the ZAP, as in zap the state and have a nice day, the zero aggression principle. We are sponsored, after all, by the Zero Aggression Project, and we still are offering these mugs. The Zero Aggression Project is a place you can go and continue to follow all the episodes that we have here, and they help make this show possible. That the zero aggression principle should include excessive force. So there is a form of violence that we recognize that is self-defense. Most pacifism is acceptable within the libertarian mindset, but it is not the norm. Most libertarians believe that violence should be reserved to acts of self-defense. And self in this particular case gets a little broader because it could be the protection of others immediately around you. And this applies whether you are a civilian or a law enforcement person. There's no specialty that's you're not cloaked in some special way that you are all of a sudden allowed to violate what is essentially a natural law, that you're not to initiate force against other persons just because you've been given a robe, a uniform, a costume, a badge, like
a mask.
A mask. Yeah, that doesn't change things. So I'm where we're going to go though for the most part is to talk about that today. So excessive force I think should be a part of this equation. Initiated force, so it's initiated violence and excessive force. What we'll divide the terms up that way: initiated violence and excessive force. Those are the things that we would be looking at in an analysis of this, and the rules are no different for the state. And there is a pretense on the part of both parties. And Nick, as we mentioned, as a legislator, he was elected as a Republican. He normally refers to himself as a conservative. There is a fatal conceit on the part of both of these institutions, because they want the control, that there are very legitimate uses for the state, and that the state is allowed to do, once it decides it's allowed to do something, it's pretty much allowed to do it, almost without limit. The limit that most of them agree upon is that the other side shouldn't be doing it, but their side is okay. And I think that's really, really a dangerous way to go about analyzing things, because we've talked about a concept here we call empathy for your future self. And that is that the power that you give a politician you love today to do something you like is a power that will be used tomorrow by politicians you loathe to do things that you hate.
Sure. And this one goes back to the Patriot Act, man.
There's so many different things we're going to touch base on here today. So what we're going to do, by the way, I want to throw out one more thing about Nick. Nick is a Green Beret who did combat duty. That's really important here. And because he did combat duty, I believe his opinion deserves a little bit extra weight. That is, he has a special set of skills, to quote a movie, that he has had to hone, both through training exercises that he will explain to you in detail in the minutes that follow, and actually living in a live setting where he had to maybe have some of these things, tells you something very, very important that everyone, I believe, I actually share his view in part, should understand. And we will do that here. But will he be doing it is going to be the big question. So here's the ground rules for the game.
As such as we know that they might exist.
Yeah, we're going to play him for 11 minutes. This is the beginning of the episode, which we will link so you have the full resource in the show description. So you can go and see if I took him out of context or I misunderstood him or whatever else. You can go reanalyze the tape on your own time. In the limited time we have here, and we've already used what I consider to be a considerable amount of that time, I'm going to ask Bill to pause. Bill's running the tape, as it were, and he's going to pause when I say pause, and I'm going to offer a piece of analysis to something Nick said. I want everybody to know I nearly finished the episode. It didn't quite get done, but I have listened to this intro portion 3 times before sitting down here and carefully considering whether or not I should react to it because of the fact that we have mutual acquaintances. I have decided that the respectful thing to do here, because of the size of his audience, is to respond directly, to respond respectfully, to try to understand his position, And, maybe he gets, tens and tens of listeners as a result of me.
Hey, well, if it
But
advances the conversation, we've done our job, right?
there's no disrespect or no animus here in disagreeing. And you will find that there's going to be points at which I'm going to have pretty strong disagreement, but it's with a position. It's not anti a human being. In fact, of anybody that we've kind of done one of these shows about, this is a guy who's probably closest to my personal points of view of all the people we've reviewed so far. But in this particular situation, let's just suffice it to say you're going to see we differ considerably, and particularly where we place our emphasis, right?
On that syllable, correct.
Yes. So what I want to do here, we'll play it. It's 11 minutes, but I'm going to keep stopping, Bill. I'm going to say pause, and then I'm going to comment, and we'll go from there. I think we've laid all the groundwork we need to lay.
Well, today we're going to talk about what I think everyone expects us to talk about, and that is the shooting that took place in Minneapolis. Now, I'm willing to bet that no matter where you are on the political spectrum, when you heard that an ICE officer had shot a woman and killed her, you had
time out. I've got to say ICE agent here.
Just good. I'm glad you said that, because not everybody may have tuned into our previous episode that we did on this. Episode 150
now. Yeah, 150 now.
Yeah. So episode 150, I'm glad you brought this up, Bill, because in there we laid out a very simple concept, which we will come back to in here. But these are not police officers. They are not officers. They are not law enforcement officers. There were no police officers on the scene that day. We will elaborate on this point later. Let's keep going.
Okay.
Had some preconceived notions about what that meant, about what happened, about how it happened, about why it happened. If you're on the right, if you're generally supportive of what ICE is doing, you probably thought, well, odds are there was a good reason, that it was provoked or something of that nature. If you're on the left, you were probably thinking, well, yeah, of course, ICE agents are violent and they're out there and they're hurting innocent people. And so it's not bizarre to believe that these jackbooted thugs would kill an innocent woman.
Pause.
Regardless of what
I want to point out that the language here is already loaded. There was a contrast made. It was reasonable to believe one thing that was said in rather neutral tones, and then it was jackbooted thugs on the other side. This is important because Nick's language is actually going to be colored this way at various levels throughout this entire presentation in ways that I'm not clear that he realizes he's doing. I think there's a real attempt on his part, even here at the very beginning, to be open and to say that he understands something of either side. But the language that he uses to describe people who oppose ICE is very colorful. It's the kind of language that as a writer you go, oh, well, that really describes and paints a picture. Whereas the language that he uses for his own side is very neutral and restrained. And you saw it right there off the bat. And if you didn't replay it, you can hit rewind and replay it. But there it is. Let's keep going.
Or predisposition was, though. The next question you should have been asking is, what sort of evidence do we have in order to either confirm our bias or determine that maybe we were wrong this time based off of the facts and evidence presented and available? And then the videos started to come out, and different angles showed different things.
Pause. I don't think that's how this happened at all. And this is a subtle point, but not one that's unimportant. I think that most people's first exposure to this actually was video. I think it's actually probably the exception that somebody heard of this and formed opinions about it and then saw video. Now, interestingly, right after this, there was another ICE-involved shooting that happened in Portland, and we didn't have video for it. And people probably did exactly what he's described here, especially because this event with Renee Good had just occurred in Minneapolis. But the very first thing I saw was a video. I immediately was contacted by other people who saw that video, wanting to know, if I was aware of it. That's what happens when a major event like this happens. My phone starts to light up. And I actually had awareness that this had gone down. And so I think that's most people's exposure. So I think they are already forming opinions from what they saw from the first video, which was the one, and we spent time in episode 150 going over 4 frames simultaneously. But this is the one that was taken from the view where you could see the ICE agents, they're walking in front of you up to Renee Good's vehicle. And I think that's what most people initially saw on social media. Let's continue.
One of the things that I noticed right off the bat, first of all, there was an increasing tendency for both sides to get on and basically claim that they understood in its entirety what had happened, right?
I agree.
And that is that's something that's been developing over time, because historically the left has always had a narrative ready to go whenever law enforcement is involved in an altercation with criminals. It's always this idea of clearly the police did something wrong.
Pause. So this is interesting because he says the left is always prepared for these situations. Okay, one of two things is true. Either they're a lot smarter than the people on the right, which, gosh, if that's the case, why would anybody be on the right? Like, why wouldn't you want to be on the smarter team? So I don't think he's implying that. I don't think that's what he wants to say. There was a narrative that happened just as fast, and it came from the highest levels. I'm going to quote Donald Trump directly here. Quote, violently, willfully, and viciously ran over the ICE officer. If that's not a characterization, I don't know what is. The Department of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, would go on to suggest that, and I don't have any notes in front of me on this one, but she would go on to suggest that this was intentional and an act of domestic terrorism. She said that that Renee Good attempted to run him over. There is no evidence at this point. Well, evidence is probably too strong a word. This has not been litigated yet. We don't actually know what her intention was. And we have a real handicap in this situation in that she's no longer here to speak for herself. But there is exculpatory evidence. There is a way to look at this. And we did some of this on episode 150, where you could see that she was attempting precisely not to hit him. I would point to the fact that, number one, she has white lights on the back of the vehicle, indicating that she is in reverse. And a decision is made during that time because the
agent
who ultimately shoots, the agent who will discharge his firearm, has pulled his weapon at the same split second that the white light indicating she's no longer going in reverse is turned off. So a decision has been made before he's run at, the car's going the opposite direction, that he needs to pull his weapon. 2 of his 3 shots will be shot at roughly a 90-degree angle through the window after the vehicle has already cleared him. And we did not have this data at the time we did episode 150. He said a very bad thing about her that related animosity. Now, you say, well, he was frustrated at that moment. I get it, but she backs the vehicle up with her wheel turned all the way to the left, because on her right, she's got an open door on a vehicle, and on her left and to her front is this officer. And so she backs up left to increase her ability to turn right. She turns the wheel completely right next and get out and avoid the officer standing in front of her. That is a completely reasonable approach to what we see here. It is not unreasonable to what we see here. That, in other words, her intention was not to hit him. And this will be argued. Like, this will be something that could be litigated at some future date, and it would be reasonable. It would be a reasonable way to look at the totality of the circumstances. Let's please continue.
Unarmed subject. It's the hands up, don't shoot. It's the George Floyd was totally innocent. When we learned out later that none of that was actually accurate. None of it was accurate. But in this case, my predisposition was ICE was probably justified in the shooting.
Pause.
And then I looked at...
That's a totally honest statement, and I want to congratulate him on that. I want to say firmly, he explains what his prior bias was. And I think that's important. Almost all of us have a prior bias as we're looking at this situation about what happened. We have a way that we analyze things. And I think if you're a libertarian, the way that you analyze something is that you look at who initiated the force or who is using excessive violence at that moment. Like, you look at that question. So that's my bias. So I appreciate that he is stating, I think this is a level of character to say up front, okay, I want you to know that before I had seen, because this is what he just got through describing, before I had seen any video Before I knew what the totality of events was, my presumption was this. I had the following bias. So I want to congratulate him. That's good. Keep going, please.
Some of the videos, I was like, okay, I could see how people might be a little bit frustrated. Does this fall within escalation of force? And then I looked at some other videos, and here's the conclusion I came to. Is there a high degree of probability that this woman was trying to escape out of the scene, that she was essentially trying to flee the scene after officers had stopped her? Yeah, that is a possibility. I could say that would be plausible.
There you go. That's good. Keep going, though. Keep going.
Is this something where she was not involved in any sort of protest or whatnot against ICE? No, I don't think so. That I don't buy. I think the evidence is conclusive that she was in fact protesting ICE and actively involved in trying to obstruct ICE from carrying out their duties. Is it justifiable for a police officer to shoot through the driver's side windshield under these circumstances? Some people will look at it and say yes. Some people will say no. Here's what I want people
right there. Pause. It cannot be. He's only giving you two circumstances. The first circumstance he gave you was she may have been trying to escape, which we just covered. The second was that she's an activist. He didn't explain anything else there. It's not possible from those two premises to get to the third, which is you shoot through the windshield. Now, I'm in the same setting he is. You're sitting here talking and you're trying to remember what you need to say. And I mix up words and tenses, and I sometimes stumble over my words or I forget a thought. And that's increasing with age, where you get this ability where you can't remember the noun that you're reaching for at a given moment. You know it. You can see it. You can visualize it. You know exactly what you're talking about. I get he may have skipped a step and not realized he did it. But let's be clear. I actually think that there are a group of people, and they used an acronym. It's called FAFO. The first one we're not going to say, but it says and find out. F around and find out. They were basically saying she played a stupid game and won a stupid prize. So there are a lot of people out there who start off with premise 2 that you're an activist of some kind who opposes this, and you were somewhere you shouldn't have been, and that is sufficient reason to get shot. Now, I exist in two realms. I think that there is a prudence, a discretion that says don't put yourself somewhere where you're going to get harmed. But that never ever entails a second realm where it excuses what happens if you do get harmed. If someone harms you, they are still culpable, they are still responsible, they should still pay a penalty for having harmed you, even if you were in a place you should not have been. That's the second level, is justice. And it is unjust, manifestly so, to say that the mere presence of her in a place she shouldn't have been was reason enough at that moment. It happened to be a city street, was reason enough at that moment to shoot through her windshield. And because plenty of people believe this, I still think it's reasonable to stop and say, whoa, you haven't arrived at a just shooting position yet. Let's keep going.
To understand. All right. And I say this as someone that has gone through a lot of training when it comes to tactical shooting, whether it was not just as an infantryman, but whether it was going through Special Forces Urban Assault Course, whether it was going through Sephardic, which is one of the premier close quarters battle schools, hostage rescue in the United States military. Like, I've been in a lot of these situations where you're constantly being thrown into situations where you have to decide whether or not you're going to shoot or not in a split second. I've been in high stress situations in a training environment where you had to make those decisions appropriately. And I've been in high stress situations in a combat environment where you had to make those decisions, where now the consequences are not just getting hazed by your buddies or potentially getting in trouble, but dying or somebody else dying as a result of your actions. And here's what I would like everyone to understand who's capable of even the most basic level of empathy. Neither or none of us that are watching the videos, none of us that are analyzing the situation after the fact, none of us had to make any sort of critical decision in that moment that was going to potentially determine the life or death of other people.
Pause, please. Pause. So I am a huge advocate of empathy. It's a very, very important topic to me, and it directly inspired the creation of Gracearchy. I hope before I'm dead to have a considerable amount of information out about just this subject. This is something I think is profoundly important and not well understood. And I think it has huge societal implications. We're going to watch where Nick places his empathy when we get back to the video, because he does have a place that his empathy lands. But it is important to understand where he's coming from. And he did a very good job of laying out his case. And I want to emphasize something I said at the outset, which is his training is valid and vital and valuable, and helps him understand some things that are very, very important about what transpired there. We'll have more to say about this as we go. But I put a lot of weight on his opinion just on the basis of all of that experience alone. I think he is a voice that should be on the porch drinking lemonade with the rest of us, as we like to say around here. Let's keep going.
And this has become a common problem with the commentary that we see in social media and on the news and with reporters. I'll never forget my father, who was former LAPD, telling me a story about how reporters in Los Angeles were constantly questioning every time law enforcement got into a firefight with somebody. It didn't matter that, the criminal might have had a firearm. It didn't matter that the criminal might have been, quote, unarmed, but was actually trying to beat an officer to death. It didn't matter that they might have been trying to use a vehicle instead of a gun or a knife or a club. It didn't matter. None of it mattered. It was always, the presumption was, what did the police do wrong? Why didn't the police shoot him in the leg? Why didn't he shoot the gun out of his hand? Why didn't they shoot the tires? Why didn't they do all of these other things that a bunch of untrained reporters?
So I can speak now with some authority because I've been through some training myself, and I'm a concealed carry person. And in previous episode 150, which we will also link in the show notes, I very early in that episode, very, very early in that episode, said it was extremely important. I think it was one of my 2 lead points of how we were supposed to digest all the material. Wanted people to understand concepts like the double tap or shoot until the threat's neutralized. Like that, you don't have fine motor control. Your prefrontal cortex is no longer the thing that is making the primary diagnosis. This is now instinct and reaction. You train instinct and reaction. You lose fine motor control, which is, by the way, your trigger finger. You don't have the same level of control. You have adrenaline taking over. You have instinctive response taking over. And the decision to pull the weapon and start to pull that trigger, which are 2 separate decisions, but happen very, very close together, or could happen very close together. You don't have time to weigh out all the different things. And we get to sit, as he's going to point out, and analyze this stuff frame by frame in hindsight.
This show is brought to you by the Zero Aggression Project. Zap newsletter subscribers get alerts when each episode is released. The Zap website is also the pathway by which you can contact us by email and support the show. This program operates thanks to tax-deductible Zap contributions, and we appreciate your support. So, zap the state, and have a nice day.
He's right about kind of the instinct that begins to take over in this situation. They're going to have more to say about the LA police too, but let's keep going.
And commentators thought that they should have done. And so what did the LAPD do? Well, they decided they were going to take a lot of these journalists and reporters to a shooting simulator. And so they took them up there and they ran them through it. And in this simulation, some of them, a lot of times what they use is like a video simulator where you have simulation rounds, or you have lasers, you have some other like system that you use, and they run officers through these constantly. And officers have to be able to successfully compete this to actually go out and walk the street and wear a badge. In the military, we had to go through several.
Okay, so this is a really important thing I'm about to say. One of the 2 or 3 most important things I'll say in this entire episode. There is a myth out there. First off, he keeps using officers. These are not officers. These are agents, for reasons we're going to explain here in a minute, but we spent a lot of time on an episode 150. I am suspicious that they are trained, and here's why. First, I had the opportunity to take an all-day defensive handgun course that had field training. There was a classroom session for a few hours in the morning, and then the rest of the day, and I'm talking a long day. I mean, another like 7 hours or so of being out there with increasing stress demands placed on you, where you had to make right and wrong decisions, and you had to make them accurately and timely and so forth. And it was basic. I didn't go through anywhere near the degree of training that Nick has, not even remotely close. Okay. He is much more competent, prepared to do all that stuff than I will ever be. He's forgotten more about this than I will know. But while I was there, the place that we were at, we had the trainer who ran the facility said that he had 2 favored clients. There was a group of people, typically they might be on like SWAT teams or some kind of special forces, and Nick himself is a Green Beret, who train constantly and enjoy training. They believe they should be trained. They take their jobs incredibly serious. The second group that he liked to serve were amateurs. And we've talked about an amateur before. The root word of amateur, as I always like to remind people, is amore, which is love. It is the love of a thing. So people who are very conscientious civilians who take on this responsibility of concealed carry come and get training because they want to make sure that they do it right. And they care a lot about getting it right. And they know their ignorance. And so they ask questions. And he said, I love these people. I adore them. It's wonderful to work with them. There's a third set of clients that he had, and that was street police officers, normal police officers. And I am suspecting that these ICE agents fit in the category, by and large, that I'm about to describe. And that is, they had a requirement that every so often, policies are going to vary from department to department, that they had to discharge a certain number of rounds on a range in front of a trainer / observer. And that once they had done that, they had met the requirement and they could go home. And their attitude was, I got a day off so I can go do this training. I'm going to get paid for my 8, but I really want to get out of here as fast as I possibly can. And I'm going to discharge the weapons as rapidly as I possibly can. I'm going to try to get out of here early. I really don't need this. And he said, I don't enjoy these. It pays, they pay the bills, but I don't enjoy working with these people. I know exactly what they want, and I know they don't want to hear me. I know they don't want to be put through the training. And so there is a myth of a well-trained law enforcement officer who really, really knows what to do with their weapon. The second thing is that I also, in my life, have met somebody who came from a completely different, more progressive view of the world, who attempted to invent a better simulator that was really going to test a lot of biological functions that were going on. And this is going back now a decade at least. He wasn't quite able to get his business off the ground for a number of reasons that were kind of a bit beyond his control. But it was a brilliant idea, what he was attempting to do. He explained and laid it all out to me. And I was very, very impressed with what he was going to do. And he said we might be able to weed out some people who are not physiologically or emotionally prepared to be able to do what needs to be done in this particular simulator. And there are officers who say they would like to have chiefs who would like to have this capacity because they know they said there's at least one in every department that doesn't belong here, shouldn't have a gun. And so he was building this system to do it and had this full confession from these chiefs, literally police chiefs, that this was happening. The reason that he thought his business model was going to work was that he found out that when budgets get squeezed in local police departments, the very first thing to go is the training. I don't quite believe this idea that cops are spending all this time learning how to do all this stuff. And it makes sense if you think about it logically. We ask police officers to do way, way, way too much in way too many different circumstances. We ask them to be social workers. We ask them to be traffic enforcement. We ask them to do a whole host of things and fill out reports correctly and do a bunch of stuff. There is a lot to learn to do that job well. So how much time are they really spending on that portion of their job? And I would argue it's not enough that they should be allowed to walk around the way that they do. It's way too easy to reach for that weapon, frankly. So I just want to dispel this myth that everybody's like mega trained like Nick is or wants to be, that is in this line of work. Let's go on.
Part of our training before we deployed. But these reporters got in there and pretty much every chance they had to shoot, not a perpetrator, but an unarmed civilian that made an erratic movement at the wrong time, they did. And the idea was, okay, guys, do you understand how difficult and complex this could be? You guys are sitting here shooting unarmed civilians every other second, not because your life is in danger, but because within a training scenario, you're not sure what to do. And you're erring on the side of your protection. And you're all failing this right now. Do you think maybe you should take this new knowledge, this new understanding, and apply it when reporting, not so that you can cover up for when there's a bad shooting, but so you can add the proper context so that the people that you're supposed to be informing understand this before they start jumping to conclusions?
Pause. The answer is an unreserved yes. You definitely should have that insight and background before you report. It's valuable, and it should inform how you proceed to report following. And I'll go one step further. I am somebody who believes that this was an unjustified shooting, and that's my take as of this hour. And I still could have my mind changed about this, but as of right now, that's what I believe for a host of reasons I laid out in episode 150 and subsequent, that this was not justified. And yet, I would encourage everyone who shares my perspective on this to have empathy for the agent in that situation. I think this is the thing to do. In fact, our show's called Gracearchy, so I'm going to say that whichever side you think is more to blame, the Christian grace position, and I know Nick professes faith, the Christian grace perspective would be to try to understand the person you disagree with, the enemy in this particular case. Whichever one is more in the wrong, you have a greater duty to attempt to understand where they're coming from. So I understand the point that Nick is attempting to make here, and the agent deserves grace too. We should be we should do everything we can to steel man and understand what he was experiencing, going through, and how he made his decision that day. That will not necessarily deem him innocent. That will not necessarily justify the shooting. But it's a human being here who was going through a stressful, difficult situation and made a decision. And we should endeavor to start with innocence before trying to determine guilt. That's our predisposition. And it's also the grace perspective. Let's continue.
And the answer in reality was no. Because what we find with so many of these people is they're not concerned about the context. They're not concerned about what's going through the minds of the people engaged. They're not concerned about any of it. They have a narrative to protect. And the truth is not only uninteresting to them, it's catastrophic to their narrative. And so manipulating it or lying about it or covering it up or reporting on it in the worst possible light is morally and intellectually justifiable to them because they are so sure of the broader narrative that they're trying to protect. And once again, that's what I saw as I looked at this. I look at the comments from people in my own section going, well, you really think he had to gun her down? Let me stop you right there. The moment you use the term gun her down.
Yeah, so I want you to pay attention to the fact that he used this phrase, gunned her down. This is an example all the way back to the beginning of this episode or our analysis section of this video, where the language is very colorful, describing the attitudes and behaviors of the other side. It's not neutral. It's not reserved. It's not judicious. It is very descriptive. And we're getting into motive, gunned her down, right? So he's saying that this is what the other side is saying, that ICE gunned her down. Well, the President of the United States, the Department of Homeland Security, NOAM, and others have said she was attempting to run him down. And they've used that narrative. And I've watched nearly the entire episode that this 11 minutes appears in. And Nick never, ever, ever, even though he reads a Homeland Security statement that was posted on Twitter, ever calls them to account for the fact that they used run them down kind of language and that they characterized her motives and intent. They spoke of what could have happened as if it did. And he doesn't call it into question once. So yes, fine. Gun them down is too strong, and it's making a characteristic judgment. That's a reasonable argument to make. I think she is executed here. I just want to be clear. I think she is. I don't think this was the necessary force. And again, we covered a lot of this in episode 150. And you're going to have your own opinions on this too, obviously. Almost everybody has seen multiple angles by now. What I have to say doesn't necessarily render me special. But the flip side, run him down. It's the same concept. And if one is unacceptable, then the other's unacceptable. until you have evidence that is equal to the claim, which neither side at this moment actually has. All of it is conjecture. All of it is projection, because we don't know what was going through the minds of the people who were there, and we haven't spoken to them. And at the moment that Kristi Noem spoke, at the moment that Donald Trump spoke, heck, at the moment that Nick Freitas recorded this show, we hadn't heard from the agent. Let's keep playing.
You are now putting into the image of people's minds this idea that this ICE officer just got bored and decided to shoot this poor woman who was simply trying to drive away. But then you watch the video, you look at the evidence, that's clearly not what happened. And yet, those are the terms you choose to use. Is that because that is an accurate reflection of what took place? Or is it because that's the sort of terminology that helps your narrative? I have no problem with people looking at this and going, was it necessary? Should there have been a different escalation of force criteria? Should the officer have simply stepped out of the way?
Pause.
Was she just trying to...
There are reports all over the place that actually escalation criteria had been very well spelled out for circumstances precisely like this by the Department of Justice, and it said that his duty was to get out of the way. Let's continue.
Escape rather than hurt anybody. These are all perfectly legitimate questions to ask, provided that you understand that in the moment when those decisions were being made, nobody had the luxury of several video angles and hours and days and time to analyze things.
Pause.
It's why we put people through training.
So this will be a surprising point. And it's something, again, I'm pulling back a curtain for people to be able to see. I spoke about this when we did the episode recently about guns, because I'm obviously an advocate. I'm a pro Second Amendment advocate, as is Nick. And I'm an advocate for concealed carry, and actually have a concealed carry license myself, and have had that since 2007. And I spoke about this in an episode we will also link in the show notes below. So I want to pull back the curtain a bit here and say to you that when I got my concealed carry, I went through an NRA training course. And as I explained in that other episode, the thesis of the thing was, yes, get your license, but never, ever, ever, ever pull your weapon. Because everybody, no matter how big a jerk they are, has a mama. And aside from the trauma you will experience from having been through the event, of knowing that you injured or potentially killed another person, you will also have legal bills and difficulties out the wazoo. Well, let me elaborate on that point so you can understand it. We were told that what would happen is a split second by split second analysis of our intentions and behaviors that would not respect the speed of the time that it was going, the trauma or the danger we perceived ourselves to be in at that moment. And it would be by observers who didn't understand carrying guns. In fact, they would believe a lot of errant or mythical things about that. And they would come up with things, hypotheticals like Nick has already suggested. Why didn't you just shoot the tires and this and that and the other? Like, there's a whole litany of things you could expect to happen. If you made the decision that you didn't want to be carried by 6, you would rather be judged by 12, you're going to have to deal with the 12 that were too stupid to get out of jury duty. That's what was said out loud. And so everybody in this position, as Nick will illustrate momentarily, knows that they are going into a situation where that's how it's going to be handled. The overwhelming urge within you should be to not want to pull that weapon and play hero at that moment. There should almost be a caution that's dangerous to yourself, because you know the consequences of acting are going to be immensely badly difficult. And you don't want to go through it. Even if you're a law enforcement officer who says, I fear for my life, and you have the entire apparatus of the state behind you, you still know that there's going to be bad consequences attached to this action. And so I have this saying that never, ever, rolled without end, do I want to have to pull out my weapon? I understand why I'm carrying it. I understand the moral responsibility. I've discussed this in other places. We're not going to get into that today. But that's the predisposition. This is normal. And even Nick Freitas knows that. Let's keep playing.
But at the end of the day, we're not talking about automatons or robots. We're talking about human beings. And if you are a human being serving as an ICE agent in Minneapolis, here's the one thing you absolutely know. pretty much every elected official within the area you have to operate to complete your legitimate function within the government to carry out lawful orders. Every single one of those elected officials is just chomping at the bit to burn you to the ground.
And there you go.
From the mayor to the governor, to the attorney general, the congressional representation, to the state legislators, all of them have been fomenting absolute hatred toward you and have established a reputation within Minneapolis as not only refusing to enforce the law when it doesn't suit their narrative, but actively encouraging the burning down of their own city. That's the environment you're operating in. And now somebody who's been obstructing your operations, who you've told to stop and get out of the car, accelerates,
Pause.
hitting you.
We don't know conclusively at this moment what all she actually has been told. We will learn some of this. It will come out. There will be people who will explain other things that were standing there that heard things. There will be deep sound analysis of the available recordings of the event as it happened live. But there is a real possibility. So there is a gentleman who was shot by a federal agent in a hotel hallway in Arizona several years ago by the name of Daniel Shaver. Daniel Shaver was given a series of commands, many of them contradictory. And when he tried to pull himself up into a crawling position in the midst of being shouted different commands that were confusing and even contradictory, he was shot and killed by the agent. He was of zero threat. He was at a distance in the hallway. In fact, he wasn't even a threat in the first place. The call came in because someone said he had a gun in the room. He had done nothing to harm anybody at the moment that this had happened. Now, and I mean literally nothing. You can go look up the Daniel Shaver story. Maybe we can find a link we can put in on this one as well. Conflicting commands. We don't know whether or not Renee Good got just one command, but ICE agents are not highway patrolmen. They are not law enforcement. And what I mean by that is they have a very narrow commission for the work that they're doing. It's very narrow. There's a lot of restrictions on what they can and cannot do that don't exist for regular police officers, folks. They are there to enforce one type of law that's a federal law. They are not there to manage traffic. Now, they want to expand the purview. And this gets into something that Nick himself should know. And almost everybody on the right did know. And that is that, I mean, they knew just weeks ago. They've forgotten it now, but they knew just weeks ago. And that is that there is a distinction between the military and the police. And there is a distinction between an occupying force, which is what ICE is, a military occupying force, and law enforcement, police officers. And some of the tells that you can come across are the masks and the fact that they don't show badges and they're doing things without warrants and getting away with it. And many of the tactics that they use to stop people, which, by the way, happen to involve automobiles an awful lot. Like they're saying, hey, you don't realize how traumatized these poor agents are with all these vehicle issues around them. But they have instigated or initiated a lot of these conditions in vehicles. This is a real common thing. And they're acting in military fashion. And we used to make a distinction between this. And as a result, the engagement, the rules of engagement look a lot more like Fallujah than they do Mayberry, which is why you heard Bill correcting me earlier and saying agent every time I said officer. We're trying to make sure that we speak correctly here about what's going on here, because this is not normal policing. Let's continue the video, please.
And now the question is, do you shoot or not? Now, with all that knowledge, all that understanding, all the recognition that over the last year, I think there's been somewhere around 100 different attempts for somebody to use a vehicle to either slam into an ICE agent or a Border Patrol agent. Maybe you were watching all the riots that took place in Los Angeles. Maybe you've been watching over and over and over again how politicians get out there and essentially give moral covering and suggest at legal approval for someone to harm you or obstruct you in your operations. That's the world you've been living in. That's the environment you've been operating in. And now you've got to make a split-second decision.
So Nick himself made a decision to go into an environment where he was unwelcome by virtue of being a Green Beret. So he already has familiarity with what I'm talking about. He understands. He's not stupid. it would have been okay. It would be sufficient if we were actually following the Constitution for the governor to say, get out of my state, to ICE. And that would be the end of the matter. And I was interacting with somebody on Facebook over this and saying, they were saying, well, then Minnesota would experience the real consequences. They would be overrun by all these illegals and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, okay, but that's a political decision. We spent a lot of time on this aspect of like what is happening in the social environment as a result of feeling like you're occupied and the natural response that comes out of that. The reason, part of the tell here that this is a military action and not policing is that it's not coming out of the community, it's being imposed from afar, and there is objection to it. There is a democratic type of objection to it, and I mean that small d, where the people don't feel represented, and so their governor is speaking on their behalf, whether you agree with them or like him or not. Because I don't agree with them, and I don't care for the cut of his jib, but you know what? If he says, I don't want this force here, that should be the end of the matter. If the sheriff at the county says, I don't want them here, that should be the end of the matter. I know that Nick understands what I'm talking about because later in this very same podcast, which we will link to in the show notes, he talks about the concept of interposition. The full statement is interposition of the lower magistrate, which is the idea that you can resist a federal law that you believe to be unconstitutional. And we put out an entire episode, which we will also put in the show notes, that's only 14 minutes long, that explains from soup to nuts in very, very complete fashion in a mere 14 minutes why ICE is completely unconstitutional to even exist, let alone do the things that they're doing. The actions that are being undertaken right now pass posse comitatus range, pass federalism concerns. They supersede and pretend that the 9th and 10th Amendments don't exist. This is not a constitutional matter for them to be there. They don't have power that's given to them constitutionally. They have power that's been given to them because the Constitution is being ignored, like it typically has been. The kind of thing that somebody who is conservative should be complaining about. And we had said in the previous episode, and this is the meta lesson of that episode, that Nick is right. You have to take into account all of the bits and pieces of this. You have to have the full context of it, and you got to weigh all the evidence. But what's missing in almost everybody else's analysis, and what we covered in episode 150, is that what happened on that street was almost inevitable. Even if it wasn't going to happen at that moment, it was going to happen somewhere because of policies that had already been decided on months and months ago. The die was cast for this. And if we don't learn from it, if we don't reverse, like somebody's asking me now, well, it's happened, so what would you do? And Christine Noem's very clear on what she thinks. That she's the head of DHS. They're sending more ICE agents. How in the world is that going to make things better? I am suggesting to you that this shouldn't have happened in the first place, and there was a way to avoid what happened. There's no reason that these two human beings should have had their history inextricably twined with one another if we were practicing first principles that I know that Nick knows. Please continue.
That could determine whether or not you survive, one of your friends survive, somebody else survives. Now,
pause.
If you don't possess,
there has been a great deal of emphasis up to this point about one thing, and that is the amount of training that this officer received and how he is competent, had to make this decision in a split second. It was life and death. You have to have empathy for this agent. You must have empathy for this agent. He is, after all, well-trained and in this situation, and he feels danger, and you need to have empathy for this agent. Are you hearing me? Please tell me what training and experience Renee Good had, because she was there too. And she had a split-second decision. And she is being accused, I think wrongly, but accused of using her car, her vehicle, as a weapon. What training did she have? How did she do this? And I don't think there's any empathy being laid here in anything that I've heard up to here, and I'll just clue you in. It doesn't ever come. Please continue.
Just the least bit of critical thinking skills or sympathy to be able to question whether or not, okay, even if you don't think that the officer should have taken that action, that it could have been a completely logical and justifiable decision in his mind at that moment under those conditions. If you don't have the ability to even consider that, I know who you are. That's why I don't care about the moral ramblings, about the tactical analysis coming from the left on this. Because
Let's
this
bring
has
it to a
happened
close there. Let's
time.
bring it to a close there, because this brings it kind of full circle from where we started, which is this notion, Bill, and join me on screen if you would, please. It's this notion that there's a narrative cast and that it is an entire wave of people. Renee Good isn't a person in this case. She hasn't been discussed. You've heard Nick's whole discussion. She's not being
collective.
discussed. She is a representative of a collective that probably deserved what happened because of this one agent. And in fact, even in all the Michael Brown stuff and the other cases that he brings up, what he wants in every single case is for the agent or the officer to be judged individually for the totality of their circumstances in that moment. And I'm with him. But when Michael Brown happened, just to pick this up and close with this, when the Michael Brown incident happens, hands up, don't shoot, right? I don't remember what the exact phrase was. It didn't matter to the people involved. And in fact, he quotes his father being in the LAPD when Rodney King happened. This is basically, it sounds like his father's in the LAPD at the time this happened. A lot of these events have particular failings where you're like, oh, okay, you know what? The officer may have been justified in what he did. I don't think it was in Rodney King, but in the Michael Brown case, it might be different. But regardless, what has happened is an entire community recognizes a pattern of things that have occurred, and they're responding not to the single event, but they're responding to the pattern. And he's saying, don't respond to the pattern. You have to judge every single event. But he is generalizing the pattern of behavior by his political opponents. And in recent episodes on other matters, including especially Charlie Kirk, this has been part of the issue. Yeah. You cannot arrive at a balanced, truth-based, empathetic view unless you consider the totality of each individual circumstance. That's how you have to do it. That's the humane way to go. It's the one we would advocate here at Gracearchy. And I thank Nick in advance for allowing me to critique his work. And if he wishes to have feedback or debate, I am available. I can be contacted at any of the email addresses that are at the bottom of the Zero Aggression Project page. The message will arrive to me. So I hope he will come. I'd be willing to talk about this some more.
Yeah, let's come on the show. And Nick, thank you. You're welcome here as a guest anytime.